Greetings, and welcome to Beatles Stuffology, where two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is JG McQuarrie, and I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm doing alright. I'm sorry if I'm sounding slightly gruffer than usual. I have a slight throat condition, but otherwise I am battling onwards. How are you doing?
I'm tickety-boo.
Tickety-boo is excellent. Are you ready to discuss money?
I'm sure, yeah. How much you got for me?
Oh, about £4.99 if you're lucky, so that's
okay.
our swap for an old Ford Cortina.
Yeah. Can I, at this point, before we start, say that, of course, there's lots of songs that reference money, and that one of the most irritating is the Pink Floyd one from Dark Side of the Moon, which has some of the most trite lyrics you have ever come across in your life. Roger Waters, if anything else, is the ultimate sixth form poet. Just wanted to say that.
All right, thank you for losing a large chunk of our audience there. I'm sure there must be some kind of overlap. Not that I in any way disagree with the statement you have just made. But anyway, let's actually talk about the Beatles. So let's actually talk about their version of Money. That's what I want. So yeah, it's the last track on the album. We are almost done with the album now, and this is how things round out. Good album closer?
Well, I mean, before we even get on to where it's positioned, I'm trying to work out whether this is the first Beatles song that doesn't fall into that "I love you, you love me" sort of thing. I suppose "Roll Over Beethoven" it kind of is not one of those trite songs about love. So it's quite nice to have a different topic, I guess. It's different. It's great, but it's also effectively, how can we put this? Twist and Shout was a very successful album closer, and this is as close to Twist and Shout as you're going to get, really, isn't it?
Well, yeah, very much, and it's very much a case of with the Beatles following the same template as Please Please Me. It's a great album closer though. Like, if you're gonna go out in a storm. And whilst the last couple of tracks that we've covered have been, how can we say it, a little less than stellar. I think it's fair to say that this is really, it's such a powerhouse ending to the album, and it's. I'm going to go ahead and give George Martin credit for this because I'm assuming that nobody from the Beatles was actually involved in the sequencing, but it does show attention as being put into where these tracks fall, and yeah, it's exactly the same as Please Please Me. We have A Taste of Honey and There's a Place immediately preceding Twist and Shout, which is, neither of which are that album's best songs, and here we have Devil in Our Heart and Not a Second Time. Same, neither of those are really highlights of the album, but we allow that slight slackening of momentum before we get the sudden punch of the final track, and Money is all punch.
Yeah, in fairness, that's probably something we'll forget to talk about in the next episode where we discuss the album as a whole. But it's an interesting point, isn't it, to think that, of course, that later on they have such complete creative control that every decision would be theirs and almost certainly theirs alone. But at this stage, they're not even present when the album's being mixed. So, their element of control is much less. So it sort of makes sense that it's a, shall we say, a studio decision in terms of, well, this has been successful, let's do it again, folks. And that makes sense. But on the other hand, this is a song that they've been playing for years and years and years.
And it really shows. That's the thing about it, that you can tell how kind of practiced that they are at it, how they've really worked out how everything is going to go, and it's delivered with such energy and enthusiasm. There's just such a sense of drive and rhythm to it, and it's just almost frustrating in a way that we've had to slog through much of side 2, which hasn't been particularly remarkable, only in the sense that everything the Beatles record is remarkable in some way, but it's just such a kind of return to form at the end of the album, and yet first song recorded.
Well, yeah, there is that, and also it's one that they've recorded before, so not only is it one of their most played live tracks according to setlist, but also it's on the Decca tapes. And it sounds very, very different on the Decca tapes. And that sort of leads me to the partial assumption that one of the key reasons for that is not the extra 18 months or whatever it is of gigs and recording and success, and increase confidence. But George Martin, because the piano makes a massive difference on this track.
It really does. It's almost kind of honky tonk sort of piano style, but just that one sort of little lead line there, it gives just that added dimension. And I mean, well, I'll ask you shortly, but I mean, like, my impression of the Decca tapes is, like, general reaction as well. Oh God, how could Decca have been so stupid as to turn down the Beatles? But if you listen to the Decca tapes, I don't think it's that hard to understand. They're not very good. And the difference in that 18 months between the two versions of Money is such a clear indicator of that. And yeah, I agree. I think the difference is George Martin. When you've got somebody who's sympathetic to the material that they're producing, who actually has a rapport with the band, which isn't just, the guy that sits behind the glass, but where there's a genuine, spark, a genuine creative musical connection between them. And somebody who's then able to knock out fairly effortlessly, I would suggest, this piano line that just transforms the song. It's just, that's the difference. And it really is. You can talk about genius clusters and all this kind of thing, but in the end, whether you want to call it coincidence, whether you want to say that there's something else, it's that extra spark, and it's George Martin that's providing this. And I mean, I adore the Beatles version of Money on this album, but yeah, it's such a stark contrast to the Decca tapes. But how do you find the Decca tapes?
Bland, a bit dull. Some of that can just be the quality of the recording. But it's, they hadn't spent a huge amount of time in a recording studio. And the interesting thing about the Decca tapes is the sheer number of songs that they actually that they put out, or that they recorded for Decca. And there's such a range in there as well. And you almost get the feeling that there aren't enough songs like Money on it, and there's too many of the sort of the ballady old standards types, because perhaps they weren't really sure, or maybe Brian Epstein wasn't really sure what Decca would be after, but they wouldn't make that mistake a second time. Although, of course, it's still a case of it being fairly fortuitous how they managed to get signed in the first place. But, so it's interesting, but it's certainly, it's not an essential listen. You're going to hear glimpses of what made them good, but this recording of Money on the album is just a world away from the original Decca tapes. It's just so different. Worth mentioning that one of the reasons why I think George Martin is so much the figure behind it is that just almost like a counterpoint of a piano line, which sounds really odd when you listen to it isolated. And you can, of course, thanks to the power of the internet and the almighty YouTube, listen to the rhythm section, listen to the guitars, listen to the piano, and listen to the vocals. And actually, I did do it in that order. And after I'd listened to both the rhythm section and the guitars, I was starting to think, what is it that actually makes this song good? Then the piano really picks it up, even though, it's quite repetitious and it's quite sort of awkward listening to that over and over again for 2.5 minutes. So that is the thing that really drives the song. But then, what can I say? The vocal track is the thing that brings it all together. The vocals on this are, a cut above anything else I think Lennon has done up to this point. They are just magnificent and powerful, almost as though he means it, almost as though Money is exactly what he wants. Imagine that.
Well, it does help that he sounds invested in it, but, fair enough. None of them were shy in 1963, 1964 about the fact that one of the things they would be able to get out of being a successful band was money. Lennon gave that interview to the NME, which was, what do you want? And his reply was, fame and money. Well, okay, that's clear. It's clear enough, but fair enough. Especially for guys who come from a working class background. That's not strictly accurate. Ringo did, and the others are various flavors of lower middle class.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, people who didn't come from a privileged background, particularly, Of course, they're going to want things which are going to make their life easier, and Lennon really lets rip on this, and it's clearly something that matters to him. He's not faking this one. There's no schmaltzy, cod sentiments or self pity here. This is what he wants, and he is going to tell us about it in the most direct way possible. But I completely agree. Like, the strength of his vocal performance in this is outstanding. It's that I would also agree that I don't think there's anything else that's come close to touching this from Lennon.
And I think we should also, allow him to change his mind. Because after all,
yeah, of course,
we're not going to hold him to all of his views. Because I think in the last episode we alluded to the fact that, or maybe it was a conversation that we had. Of course, you can't do that coming up, reasonably soon, and that's quite heavily laden with misogyny. But you certainly wouldn't be able to accuse Lennon of that, say, into the 70s, and some of his recordings are actually, trying to basically say, "Hey, everyone, let's treat everybody nicely, folks." He's allowed to change his mind. He's allowed to then go from "money, that's what I want," to "imagine no possessions." That's fine. Isn't that emotional maturity? After all, you never know. There's a possibility that 64.5 million people who currently think that our current Prime Minister, Liz Truss, is the most useless person on this planet, some of them might change their minds in the next few weeks.
Yeah, we should say Prime Minister at time of recording. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That is a very important caveat. Yeah, but obviously, no, you're right. I mean, Lennon takes a lot of stick for his, for his misogyny and his attitude to women. In the 60s, and there's obviously plenty of justification for that. But he does grow and develop. He eventually apologizes to the way that for his treatment to Julia and to Julian and the kids and all the rest of it. So he does go through a period of emotional growth, and you can't you can't deny that. However, it's the old Elvis Costello line. It's easy for the millionaire to say "imagine no possessions," but nevertheless, fine, yeah. Whatever. I mean, as far as this song goes, 1963, he means it. He wants his money, and it's kind of hard to argue with him in that sense. And although his vocal is amazing in this, and I don't in any way want to take away from that, but McCartney deserves some real credit in the vocal front as well. Like, his backing vocals in this are really amazing, and it's another one of those times where he has the opportunity to demonstrate the strength of his voice, but it's kind of, I mean, obviously it's backgrounded, it's a background vocal next to Lennon's, but it just shows how strong his voice is. He is a really, really good vocalist, and he doesn't always get credit for that. Sometimes he will, but it's in songs like this that you can see what a good utility player he can be as well, because he's not taking anything away from the power of Lennon's lead vocal. Lennon's vocal is just the most dominant thing in this track, but the support that he gives and the strength of his voice on the backing vocal is just amazing. It's like the piano line. It just adds so much more dimension to it.
I think the difference for me in this is the fact that when he's holding a note, or when he's holding, on a word like money and want, he's sustaining it rather than jumping around between notes. And because I think when he has to demonstrate a range and go from low to high or whatever, he struggles. The intonation struggles, but actually it's a lot more powerful here because it's sustained. And he can do that. That's great, and it really, really works. The backing vocals, I don't really notice quite so much. Just like, I don't really think there's that much to notice outside of the piano. Everything else just keeps it going. It's almost as though they recognize the fact that actually these bits of the song are really important. These bits are purely functional, and let's not muck around with it too much and just get the job done.
Yep, absolutely. So here's the inevitable question that we kind of have to brush up against when we're talking about covers. Do you think it's better than the original?
Yeah. Is it the best version of it?
No. Well, no, that's a very, very much a separate question, and yeah, I'm going to go ahead and guess I know what you're thinking here.
Well, I mean, it did come up in a previous episode. I can't remember. It may even have been the twist and shout one, when I did mention what I thought it was. Okay, so I mean, in terms of the original, it's fine. It's quite interesting actually that that the legendary Barrett Strong was not really a successful recording artist. Much more as a lyricist.
Yeah.
Um, but it's his song. Whether or not he actually contributed to the writing of it although he has a credit, is apparently something that's disputed. But the name is on it, and it's fine. Good singer. It works. It's powerful, and actually this is where we said that stuff semi-jokingly about Lennon and Money earlier. Of course, it is a cover. It's not as though Lennon sat down and thought, "Oh, what am I going to do? Oh, I'm going to write an early version of Working Class Hero. Hey, brilliant, let's do it." But interesting that he selected a song that was already there, that was about money. And we could do a social history bit here, couldn't we? About how at this point maybe people were starting to have more disposable income and enjoying themselves in new and different ways, invention of the teenager, etc., 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 all of that sort of thing. So it actually could have been a generation that was starting to get a bit of money, and getting money for the sake of having money, and then using it for entertainment, using it to live the kind of life that their parents perhaps weren't able to live, in a world that was growing in consumer products, and in fact records being the perfect example of it. But I think Barrett Strong as a person is just really, really interesting when you think of the people he worked with, when you think of the songs he was responsible for co-writing, like Papa Was a Rolling Stone, Heard It Through the Grapevine, and War. Thank you. There's tons more beside that, and I think it just makes him a really interesting person. And bearing in mind, we've gone from what was the last song here? JG, help me out.
Well, the last song that we recorded,
Yeah.
Not a second time.
No, it's the one before that. It's Devil in a Heart.
Devil in a Heart.
The one that's the Donnays cover. Yeah. From a band that released one song, well, one single, to covering something that is by such a legendary figure. And not just in the kind of like the Chuck Berry, roll over Beethoven. There's something that's a bit kind of cliched these days about Chuck Berry. It doesn't quite work. He has this reputation amongst early rock and rollers, but actually that reputation hasn't really sort of kept on. And yet, if you were to sit people down and say, okay, right, well, the person who originally released this was also responsible for writing the words to "I Heard It Through the Grapevine," they might go, right, okay, there's something in that. They might actually therefore recognize something of the power of it because of the bits that they do actually know. And also worth pointing out that he's quite possibly one of the few songwriters that the Beatles recorded who is referenced in a Billy Bragg song.
Excellent.
So answers on a postcard, listener. Or, if we remember, at the end of the episode.
Okay, well, we'll see if we can manage a callback. That'll be quite the achievement. But I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Barrett Strong is such a fascinating individual, and I do really like that recording. I do really like the original recording. Again, it's kind of different in the way that we often find with the Beatles recordings. They do manage to take something of the original song, retain it, and then also do something different with it. And much though I like the original, I don't think that there's much question that the Beatles version is better. It's certainly far, far more powerful. It's got far more drive to it. And it's sort of spiky and angular and all these other lovely, lovely things. And the Barrett Strong version is really good. I think it's maybe more musically accomplished in the sense that I think the musicianship is probably more finely crafted on it. But then again, I think the whole point of the Beatles version is that it isn't well crafted. It's crude and it's well, not angry. It's crude and it's full of desire and it's full of passion, and so that kind of slightly more crafted musicianship wouldn't sit as comfortably with the Beatles version. Even again, that honky tonk piano, it's not a classical piano. It's not a normal kind of instrument. It's got that slightly grungy kind of edge to it, and that fits in very well with the way that the Beatles have chosen to put this song together. It is an astonishing recording. But speaking of astonishing recordings, shall we tip our hat? Shall we tip our hat to the Flying Lizards?
I think we should.
I think we
we
as well.
absolutely should. I think there are maybe things have changed in the last however many years, but I think there are few covers that sort of take a song and update it to the time as well as the Flying Lizards cover of this, because it's 79 and it's really difficult to describe. It's stark, but it also uses technology, emerging technology in a brilliant way. With the sound of the drum in particular, it does something completely different with both the lead vocals and the backing vocals. It's got a sense of disdain towards I don't know if it's towards the audience or towards the subject. That is
it's very ambiguous.
It is, but it's really kind of arty, but also clever. I'm sort of thinking that it's the kind of thing that perhaps the Art of Noise might have done, or the KLF might have done at some point. I love it, and what I can't quite remember is, I would have been 6 or 7 when it was originally released, depending on when in 79 it came out. But it's something that I was aware of from a young age, but I can't remember if it was from 79 or whether it then started being used elsewhere, as a result. And it's still being used. It's now in an Asda advert, which is obviously, it's ironic, but it has something about it. And what I find it, okay, right. So let's forget. It's interesting that when Asda's advertising team were sitting down and thinking, right, okay, what can we use for our new reward scheme, loyalty scheme, which is, instead of giving people points, is giving them money. Right, we need something about money. Let's go for the song Money. Oh yeah, the Beatles did that. Well, should we use that one? Should we use Barrett Strong? Oh no, Led Zeppelin did it as well, with that slow, grimy, dirty, funky kind of version. Should we use that? No, let's use the really quirky, weird one from 1979, because it fits. It really works. And then they clearly built an advert around it, which sort of makes it seem like a 80s, maybe early 90s video game as well. People going around the supermarket picking up coins as they go. It just works, and it works in so many different ways, and it seems to be the go-to version of it that people use, which I think is fascinating. And that's kind of why I think it is, in the end, just more effective than the Beatles one. It's the one that people remember.
It is utterly brilliant. I would just maybe also bear in mind the fact that it probably is slightly cheaper to license the Flying Lizards version than Led Zeppelin or the Beatles. So probably
don't ruin a good argument.
Sorry, no, I agree with the argument, but I would feel remiss in my duty if I didn't possibly flag that as another reason. But yeah, everything about that version is just. It's just so incredible. The absolute disdain, and that the best things in life are free, kind of dismissive, kind of almost sort of Germanic kind of delivery, and it's kind of very austere, and like Art of Noise is such a good point of comparison as well. I completely agree with that. This kind of it's not really even traditional instruments. It's kind of constructed from banging on pots and pans and all the rest of it. There's very little traditional instrumentation. It's a brilliant version. I think if it's not the best cover version of all time, it must be in like the top 5 or something.
Yeah.
It's literally that
Yeah.
good. It's utterly incredible. I think it's in terms of why it hung around. I mean, I would have definitely have been 6 in 1979 when this was released, and I remember it well into the 80s, still hanging around. It used to get played a lot on like jukeboxes with 45 RPMs, and I know that it hung around for a lot. That I remember the video very vividly as well. They're sort of sitting in a kitchen, literally kind of banging on kettles and pots and stuff. It's unbelievably cheap. It must have cost about £3.99 or something. But again, it's utterly perfect for the song. It's just full of sort of derision and contempt and a kind of very punk attitude, but it doesn't sound anything like punk at all. Of course, it's extremely new wave. It's just glorious. It's just one of the most glorious records ever recorded, and I couldn't possibly love it more.
It's quite difficult to find information out about them, actually.
Yeah, they're pretty obscure.
Yeah, which is a real shame, because I would be interested in knowing a bit more, because if you do some very, very kind of basic research, one of the places where you can get that sort of information, of course, you're looking at Wikipedia, and there's a suggestion, an implication that the likes of Robert Fripp at one point were involved, and even Michael Nyman. Now, I can't believe that that's accurate in any way, shape, or form. But I'd just like to know a little bit more.
It would be kind of fascinating, but yeah, I agree. They're very kind of obscure. They're not really well documented, but fair enough. Like they had one hit, which was a middling success, and it's hung around in kind of popular culture. I mean, even sort of beyond that, it gets used in TV shows, and it's a very kind of go-to sort of song. But it was one hit, and they released what, 4 albums, I think in total. None of which, other than the first one, the one that this was from, none of which charted anywhere as far as I can establish. So sometimes that's the fate of a band. They can knock out one killer track and then just sort of fade from history, and that seems to be how it is for the Flying Lizards. But if you're gonna have one track to your name, you couldn't really do much better than this one.
Yeah. No, it's fair enough. Yeah. Oh well. Maybe I'll go looking them up on various streaming services. Although in reality, I probably won't. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But actually, one thing that you mentioned that is worth going back to in terms of the Beatles is that not just the fact that they it's one of their most played live tracks, but it is also one that they chose to record on the first day of album sessions. It was the second song, and I think that's really important. They go from "You Really Got a Hold on Me" into "Money." So, and in fact, it's weird. Again, we'll talk about this more on the next one. They're basically doing a day of covers. I don't know whether that was deliberate or whether that was sort of designed just to get them into the recording of it. But you've got "Really Got Hold of Me," "Money," "Devil in a Heart," "Until There Was You," as the songs recorded on day one of the sessions, which does kind of undermine my argument, doesn't it? If you've got "Devil in a Heart," "Until There Was You," but then we're looking at it from our point of view. McCartney loved "Till There Was You." That was one of the big ones that he loved to sing. I suppose because there was that sort of show tunes connection to the songs that he learned as a kid, but it clearly meant something to them.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. Like you say, we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next episode. But as far as money's concerned, like if you want to get your album off to kind of like a roaring start, if you want to feel that you've built something and get your confidence up and your energy up and really get stuck in, I mean. Yeah, if your first 1-2 punch is "Money" and "You Really Got a Hold on Me," I mean, you're doing okay. That's a pretty good way to get your album started.
The thing is, though, and I think this is quite surprising, looking at some of those set lists, assuming they are accurate, what you might find surprising is that the Beatles would regularly open with "Twist and Shout" and then follow it with "Money."
Yeah, which must have been great on Lennon's voice.
Yeah, especially in what is just a 10-song set. But That's fine. He clearly enjoyed doing it, but so it's at the end, and perhaps this is another reason why you might suggest that it's George Martin who's done the track listing here, because the Beatles thought enough of it to whack it at the start of their gigs, whereas actually then you look at the album and it's at the end, so an opener but a closer in the recording studio.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with that, of course, and yeah, well, rather than repeat ourselves and the glory that is George Martin, we can use that as the end of the album and indeed the end of the episode. So, score please, Mister. Just score please, Mister.
Okay, so I'm gonna give it a very, very healthy 7. Primarily
7.
because it's we've still got a lot of room for classic songs, and we've got to leave somewhere to go for those 8, 9, and those 10s.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Now I also have to give it. Let me have a little look at my magic list here. Let's see. I think I'll give it 7.5. I agree. It also needs somewhere to go, but at the same time, I think this is just such a brilliant recording. The only song on this album I've given more to is "You Really Got Hold of Me." So actually, yeah, I'm fine with that. So 7.5 for me.
Very good, very good. I suppose at this point, people have obviously tweeted in and already sent their emails. So of course, it's worth pointing out that the answer to the quiz question is, of course, Levi Stubbs' Tears, for the glorious middle 8, in which Billy Bragg basically points out the fact that however miserable your life is, that there are these great songwriters who are there to make everything okay. And in fact, it says Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong are here to make everything right that's wrong. Holland, and Lamont Dozier too are here to make it all okay with you. And I couldn't agree more.
Wow, fantastic. And thank you for being professional enough to remember to give us the callback that we were otherwise going to.
Hang on, you were going to pick.
Well, yes, all right, fine, me. Okay, right. Brilliant. Okay, let's wrap things up there then. You can contact us by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We are on Twitter @Beatles_ology, and you can find my blog at www.jgmcquarrie.scot. Also, please check out my other podcast, Talking Trek to You, where a noob and an expert, me apparently, go through the original Star Trek episode by episode. For this podcast, please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcatcher you're using so that more people can find the show. We are done with the Beatles now, but we're also not quite done with the Beatles this time, because next episode we're going to be talking about With the Beatles, as in the entire album. And as always, we hope you're going to join us for it. But until then, keep listening.